let's start right off the top with just news in general of Julio Jones getting traded to the Titans. The Titans were the favorites, or the heavy favorites, I would say, just in terms of what was being reported for quite some time. And there was those pictures of Julio training with Derrick Henry, Alabama guys. There's a lot of things tying him to Tennessee, and it sounded like Tennessee was
the A.J. Brown recruiting.
Yeah, it was the most aggressive team, to pursue Julio. But what was your initial reaction to the Julio trade to Tennessee, and how much do you worry about the Titans now in the AFC?
A lot. And I think the Titans knocked it out of the park. I've said it before on this program. I think there's a real chance now that the Titans finish with the best record in the AFC. I don't think they're the best team, but when you factor in, how new this offense is going to be and that element of it and the division they play in, I think they're a threat. And people will come at me and say that their defense sucked last year, and that's not an incorrect assessment, but I think their defense in some ways, I think they just had guys who had down seasons. I don't know that the unit they were last year accurately depicts the talent level, if that makes sense. I think just by, natural, moving back to the mean, they'll be good. So I saw somebody tweet when it happened, oh man, that's, it's such a disappointing ending. What's the word I'm looking for?
Anticlimactic.
Thank you. And these are always anticlimactic. When a major player gets moved like this, don't screw around. The Titans had the most to gain by making this move, I think, more than the Patriots. They had the most to gain by making this move. They went out, they made it. They're a very good football team now. They're going to be a ton of fun to watch. And yeah, they're a threat in the AFC. I think it's them and Kansas City as 1 and 2. And then you probably have Buffalo kind of right there with Baltimore as vying for that third spot. But the Titans are a real deal right now. They not that they weren't before, but this takes it to another level.
The Titans are going to test what we know about how to play defensive football just from a structural standpoint, because they had Corey Davis, and Corey Davis is a good player, but he's not Julio Jones, right? And so when you came out to play the Titans, you could put extra guys in the box. You could play single high against them and rotate over the top and not be as concerned about the passing game. Now, the passing game in Tennessee was really prolific, especially off of play action, because of how good Derrick Henry is and because of how many resources need to be invested in stopping that running game. Now you really, if you're a defensive coordinator, when Bill Belichick and the Patriots prepare for the Titans this season, they're going to have to think about, okay, do we play them single high, or do we play too deep to keep two safeties deep over the top of A.J. Brown and Julio Jones and give up a body in the box to Derrick Henry? Or do we first and foremost stop the run, focus on that, and then worry about the passing game from there? Typically, Bill Belichick goes the route of let's stop the run, right? Because that's the easiest way to move the football, is to just hand the ball off to Henry. But the problem is when you get into that sort of game, then the Titans shorten the game. Right. Then they end up having, Alex, I think your lights went out. I don't know if we lost Alex. We might have just lost Alex to a rolling thunderstorm through the outskirts of Boston here. So I'll try to carry the pod for a few minutes here and continue my thought, and hopefully we'll get Alex back here in a second. But what I was saying about kind of rotating through single high structures versus two high structures is really important when we're starting to talk about the Tennessee Titans now. And as we've sort of seen the evolution of the NFL defenses and the NFL passing game, we have seen defenses, specifically in terms of what we've seen from teams like the Los Angeles Rams, for example, with Brandon Staley, is get into more too deep type of stuff, which is a very common coverage in the college game, not so much in the pro game until now, where you're playing a lot of quarters on early downs, or you're playing maybe some variations of cover 2 as well, but really a cover 4 quarters based structure scheme. And what that allows you to do is when you start at too high, and now a lot of people don't like to stay stagnant and they want to rotate as well. So when you start at too high, what you're doing is you are one short in the box, but you can rotate that safety down into the box as another run defender, or as potentially somebody that's going to cut a crossing route or cut as something coming over the middle like a deep dig. We do have Alex back in the dark. I love what's going to look ridiculous.
So my power's out. I'm using the hotspot on my phone. I've got an old iPhone as the light, so I apologize that maybe we'll tell some ghost stories. Some maybe that's what we'll, it's June. We got to come up with football content. Maybe some scary football stories.
This is really this is what happens when technology fails us, and Mother Nature can still knock the power out. That's the one thing that. But the Patriots Beat podcast, we don't stop rolling here on Patriots Beat, right, Alex? We figure it out. I love this. This is great. I think I could said enough about defending the Titans and how it's going to be difficult to decipher whether
I had an interesting thought. 1 second. Sure. I just want to make sure that this is going to stay up. So you mentioned that it's what was the exact word? It's going to change the way we view playing defense. It's going to test the way we view playing defense. Whatever it is, I think that it's going to test the way teams build. It's going to test roster building as we know it, because for the last 20 years, pretty much since the Patriots went on that one run with Brady and the Colts had their success with Manning, the idea was get the quarterback at all costs. And if you find the quarterback, whatever you put around him, you have around him, and you'll still probably succeed. The Titans are the antithesis of that. Not that Ryan Tannehill's bad. I think he's been good since he got to Tennessee, but Defensive Player of the Year in Derrick Henry, arguably the best wide receiver in football in Julio Jones. A.J. Brown's another. Am I stretching if I call him a top 10 receiver? I think he's certainly top 15. You look at the offensive line they have. They have some superstars on the offensive line, right? Chief among them, Taylor Lewan, of course. So, where everything's been get the quarterback. And I've talked about this in the past as it relates to the Patriots, right? And using the 2019 49ers as that model, the net neutral quarterback. If you can put the talent around him, this is the most extreme example of that we've seen thus far, right? So if the Titans succeed, I think you're going to see teams try to copy this model where, you know what, we're not going to go out and give up 5 first-round picks to draft a quarterback that we don't know if he'll be good. We'll take the receiver. We'll take the tackle. We'll take the tight end. We know it's the sure thing because they'll hit, and then we just have to get a competent quarterback, which is much easier. So if the Titans go on a run here, I think you're going to see a new era of roster building come from that.
It's a great point, and it's something that we've talked a lot about on the show, and we sort of compared it to Jimmy G, right, in San Francisco, and said they made the Super Bowl with Jimmy G at quarterback, attempting, 8 passes or something like that in the NFC Championship game. Yep. And you don't need
fewest in the modern era.
Right. You don't need, now you need a great defense. You need a great supporting cast around all that, but you don't necessarily need Tom Brady. You don't need Peyton Manning. You don't need Joe Montana or John Elway or Dan Marino or whatever GOAT quarterback you want to use to make a deep playoff run and to contend in the NFL. What you do need is a great roster, and the Titans, Ryan Tannehill is a solid NFL quarterback, and I think he's better than maybe some people think, but he's still not going to the Hall of Fame, right? He's still Ryan Tannehill to some degree, and they have made him look like a really, really great quarterback by putting him in a really good position to succeed and in a great system.
It's the opposite of what everybody's been doing, right? You look at the Patriots and it was, our receivers are Kenbrell Tompkins and whatever's left of Austin Collie, right? And Tyquan Underwood and that. And the idea was, those guys aren't the best, but Brady will elevate them. And I think teams are finally starting to realize, I just noticed the shadows of my hands on the wall behind me. Real exaggerating. What teams are now starting to realize is that system works in reverse. And maybe Ryan Tannehill's not the best quarterback, but the pieces around him are going to make him better. And I think this is going to be really exciting if this catches on, a really exciting era for the league, because the league being quarterback driven was certainly fun, but I think in some ways it hurts the overall game in that
there's just not enough good quarterbacks to have that be the case.
And you're limited with good teams in that. You're kind of limited in who your superstars are too. When you start having the impact player in an offense not just be at one position, it's really going to open up different styles of play, different kinds of players. It's just going to make the game more well-rounded. So it's something that I think has the potential to be very exciting.
Yeah, and it's going to be fascinating to see how defensive coordinators around the league sort of evolve, because the Titans and Arthur Smith's now in Atlanta, obviously, but they're going to continue their system, right? They're going to continue running their scheme.
Right.
Is still a very heavy outside zone, play action heavy offense, similar to what we see in San Fran and with the Los Angeles Rams. And what we've seen across the league is sort of what I was talking about earlier. It was a lot more too high structures, so you can rotate those safeties to cut off those crossing routes and those deep crossers, and then insert into the box to stop the run, but give that too high look. This is what the Patriots did in Super Bowl 53 against the Rams. They've done it in the past, the same sort of style against the Titans in the playoffs and in other instances. So I'm really fascinated to see how defensive football catches up to not only that scheme, certainly, but also just everything that this arms race, right? That all these teams are just, everything's about accumulating as many weapons as possible. It's going to be really interesting to see how these defenses sort of evolve to that. Were you surprised that the Patriots weren't more interested in Julio Jones? Because I reported, Jeff Howe reported, Peter King reported, a lot of people reporting at this point that the Pats sort of made a call early on in the process, recognized that the price point wasn't going to be where they wanted it to be, and sort of bowed out awfully quickly in this, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm not totally shocked. I think it's kind of how they handle free agency, right? It's, everybody else is going to negotiate and everybody else is going to play their games, but we have our price and that's what it is. And, you either meet it or we move on and we can find somebody else. And I think that if the price was right, I don't think they were against acquiring Julio Jones. I feel like some people have tried to paint it that way. I don't think that they were, totally against it. But given the contract and everything, I just think they had a certain amount they were willing to spend, and that amount was non-negotiable. And by the way, if you're just joining, my power's out, which is why I look like this.
It's actually, you're coming in through very, very clear for somebody. What are you on, a hotspot right now?
I'm on the phone. I'm on the phone hotspot. So we'll see. I have full juice. My computer's at 88%. So we should be able to get through the show, hopefully. Knock on wood. But it's just the shadows behind me are,
this is fascinating.
Out of control.
I know you're mesmerizing me with the shadows. And there's the evil laugh too on top of all of it. Now
I need a cat. Because this chair even spins too, so I can do like the the Dr. Evil thing. All right, let's get back to football.
You're getting me dizzy now. So the contract is really what it came down to with Julio Jones.
Yeah.
I think the Patriots and a couple of other teams that were interested in Jones were interested in Jones under the assumption that maybe they could do something with that contract, right? The Pats, quite frankly, did not want to pay Julio Jones $15 million in 2021. It's really that simple. They could have done the trade compensation. I think the trade compensation, on top of the fact that you had to pay him $15 million, was a big part of it as well. But the second and the fourth round pick was not the deal breaker, right? The deal breaker was that it was a second and the fourth round pick, and you had to pay the full $15 million. The Falcons weren't going to eat any of it, and Julio wasn't going to rework the contract because he didn't have to, right? There was enough suitors out there, Tennessee being chief among them, that he didn't have to go out there and rip up his deal to make a trade happen, or the Falcons didn't have to give up a lot in the trade, right? They didn't have to give only take a 6th round pick or a 4th round pick back. There was legitimate interest in Julio, which is obviously not shocking, but that was the point, was that the Patriots, like they did in free agency, if there was a market inefficiency, if they recognize, wow, we can really get this player because nobody else is bidding, we can really get this player for pennies on the dollar, then we're going to go out and make this move. But that isn't what ended up being the case. So I think that's a big part of it, is that the Patriots spent like that in free agency because they saw sort of an inefficiency in the market, right? That they were able to see, we have all this money, nobody else has any money, we can sign all these guys and nobody else can. But that's not the case with the Julio thing. Is there was enough bidders, there was enough people that wanted Julio that they had to pay top dollar for him, and that just never was going to happen.